The small-town courthouse in Ashford, Oregon, had never felt so heavy with anticipation. From the outside, it looked almost quaint, a two-story brick building with a white-pillared entrance and a weathered American flag rippling in the cold morning wind. Inside, however, the atmosphere was electric, tense, and unyielding. Every bench in the gallery was filled, shoulder to shoulder, with locals who had taken the morning off work just to witness what was already being called the case that split the town in two. It was the trial of Officer Daniel Hargrove, a man many had once called a hero. Decorated for bravery, commended for years of service, and known for his work in the K-9 unit, he now stood accused of something almost unthinkable: cruelty to Ward, his own partner, a German shepherd named Rex. The allegations claimed that behind the polished uniform and the public smiles, there had been shouting, rough handling, and even intentional neglect. It was the kind of accusation that could destroy a career and a reputation in a heartbeat, if proven true. The courtroom's wooden interior seemed to absorb the murmurs of the crowd, muting them to a low hum. Old brass lamps cast pools of amber light across the benches, the defense table, and the judge's bench. The air smelled faintly of varnish, paper, and rain, the kind of scent that clung to coats and floors after a wet morning dot at the defense table. Officer Hargrove sat with his attorney, a sharp-suited man whose perfectly styled hair didn't move when he leaned in to whisper. Hargrove's jaw was set, his posture rigid, but his eyes flickered occasionally toward the floor at his feet. There lay Rex, his partner, his alleged victim, and perhaps the only one in the room who couldn't speak for himself. The dog's large frame rested on a thin mat, his tan and black coat still glossy, despite the tension in the room. He wasn't asleep, though his eyes were half closed. Every so often, his ears twitched at the sound of footsteps or shifting benches, but otherwise, he was still. Too still. For a dog of his training, one might have expected alertness, even pride. Instead, there was a strange quiet in his presence, a stillness that almost felt like resignation. Across the aisle, at the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Melissa Crane reviewed her notes, flipping pages with deliberate care. Her gaze would occasionally drift toward the gallery, scanning the faces as if looking for someone specific. Her case was strong on paper: veterinary reports, photographs, and sworn statements, but she knew the emotional heart of it lay in the testimony yet to come. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man with a graying mustache, stepped forward. "All rise," he announced, his voice cutting cleanly through the low chatter. The creak of benches echoed as everyone stood. Judge Whitman, a man whose stern demeanor had become legend in Ashford, entered from the side door and took his seat. His robe flowed neatly around him, and he adjusted his glasses before surveying the courtroom with a measured glance. "You may be seated," he said. The shuffle of movement followed. The judge's gaze lingered momentarily on the defendant, then on the dog at his side, before shifting back to the attorneys. "This is the matter of the state of Oregon versus Daniel Hargrove," he began. "Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" Both attorneys answered in the affirmative. The opening statements had been given the previous afternoon, and the trial had already seen a day of witnesses. But today's schedule promised something unusual, something that had spread through town gossip like wildfire. The testimony of a child Dot as the clerk prepared the docket. A side door opened quietly near the front row of the gallery. A small figure stepped inside, her hand wrapped tightly around that of a woman in a neat gray coat. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old, dressed in a simple pale blue dress and scuffed black shoes. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a single braid, and she clutched a small stuffed rabbit to her chest as if it were a lifeline. The whispers started almost immediately. Some spectators leaned toward each other, murmuring questions they didn't have answers to. Who was she? What could such a young child possibly know about a case like this? And why did the prosecutor seem to straighten in her seat the moment a girl entered? Emily was her name, though most in the room didn't know it yet. She walked slowly, her steps measured but unsure, as though each one took effort. Her eyes, wide and solemn, flicked toward the defense table. For the briefest moment, Rex's ears perked, his head lifting slightly. It was a small movement, but one that did not go unnoticed, not by the prosecutor, not by the judge, and certainly not by the jury. Judge Whitman cleared his throat, a sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. I remind everyone, he sighed, that we will maintain order and decorum during all testimony. This includes showing respect to our youngest witnesses. Emily's mother led her to the front, where the bailiff met them. The girl looked up, her small fingers tightening around her rabbit, and nodded at something the bailiff said quietly. She was helped onto the witness stand, her feet dangling well above the floor. A glass of water was placed within reach. The defense attorney watched with a faint smirk, leaning back in his chair, as if this was an unnecessary formality. But the prosecutor's focus was sharp, her eyes on the girl, as though willing her to find courage. From the back of the room, the sound of rain tapping against the tall windows filled the pause before the first question. It was as though even the weather outside knew the weight of the moment. Emily, the prosecutor began gently. Do you know why you're here today? The girl glanced at her mother before nodding slowly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. In the stillness. Because I met Rex, she said, her eyes drifting toward the dog again. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. The prosecutor didn't rush. And when you met Rex, she continued, did something happen? Emily's lips pressed together, and she looked down at her rabbit. Her silence only deepened the curiosity in the room. The judge, leaning slightly forward, seemed to recognize the fragility of the moment. You can take your time, he said kindly. Emily inhaled, her small shoulders rising. Yes, she whispered. Something happened. And with those 3 words, the tone of the trial shifted. What had been a slow, procedural march toward the truth now felt charged with a different kind of energy, one that made even the most skeptical in the room leaned forward. Rex, lying beside the defense table, lifted his head a little higher. His dark eyes fixed on Emily, unblinking, and his tail gave the smallest of movements. No one in the room could have guessed how deep the connection between the little girl and the dog would run, or that, before the morning was over, 2 simple words from her would silence the courtroom entirely. The courtroom, though no stranger to tension, had a different kind of silence now, the kind that didn't come from formality, but from curiosity and unease. Even the rain outside seemed to hush as Emily shifted in the witness chair, her small hands gripping the arms as though she needed something solid to hold on to. The stuffed rabbit now sat on her lap, its button eyes staring blankly at the floor. The bailiff, standing off to her right, had given her a glass of water, but she hadn't touched it. Her braid lay neatly against her back, the ends curling slightly, as though they'd been brushed into place just that morning. She looked impossibly small in the heavy wooden chair, framed by the high-backed witness stand that dwarfed her. The prosecutor, Melissa Crane, approached with a kind of slow, deliberate movement used with frightened animals, calm, gentle, without sudden shifts. She knew from experience that the wrong tone could make a young witness shut down entirely. Emily, Melissa began, her voice soft but clear enough for the jury to hear. I know it can feel a little scary being here, but I want you to remember, you're safe. Nobody is going to hurt you. Emily nodded faintly, though her eyes stayed fixed on a spot just past Melissa's shoulder, the space where Rex lay. Melissa noticed the glance and followed it. Rex was still in the same place. At the defense table, his head low, ears twitching occasionally. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like the dog was merely listening. To Melissa, it felt like the animal was waiting. "Do you remember the day you met Rex?" Melissa asked, taking a step closer to the jury box. Emily's lips pressed together, and she glanced toward her mother in the front row. The woman gave her a small nod, mouthing, "It's okay." "Yes," Emily finally said. Her voice was small, but it carried in the courtroom's quiet. Melissa allowed a pause, letting the jury turn toward the child and absorb the sight of her, a witness so young she barely reached the edge of the desk in front of her. "Could you tell us where you were?" Melissa asked. Emily shifted in her seat. "The park," she said, barely above a whisper. Melissa smiled gently. "And was anyone with you?" "My mom," Emily replied. She hesitated, then added, "And him." She gestured faintly toward the defendant without fully looking at him. The shift in the room was subtle, but palpable. Jurors straightened. The defense attorney's pen froze mid-note. Melissa took a step back, letting the answer hang in the air. "And when you say him, do you mean Officer Hargrove?" Emily nodded. Rex single quotes S ears pricked. He didn't move otherwise, but Melissa caught the change, the quick flick upward, the slight tension in the muscles along his neck. "And Rex was there too?" Melissa asked. Emily's eyes softened as they landed on the dog. "Yes," she sighed, with a small nod. Melissa paced slowly toward the jury, speaking as if explaining something fragile. "Emily, can you tell us what you saw that day?" Emily's small fingers twisted in the fabric of her dress. "It was raining," she began. "Me and Mommy were in the gazebo. Then we saw them." She nodded toward Rex again. "He was wet, really wet and shaking." A murmur rippled faintly through the gallery, quickly silenced by the bailiff's stern glance. Melissa's voice stayed calm, though the statement had landed hard with the jury. "Did anyone else notice him shaking?" Emily hesitated, then said, "The man with him. But he wasn't nice." Melissa stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" He pulled on the leash hard. Emily's eyes flickered to the defendant again, but she didn't linger. "And he said Rex wasn't friendly. He told me to stay away." Melissa took a slow breath, her mind racing with the implications. This was the thread she needed the jury to follow. "And did you stay away?" Emily shook her head. The faintest hint of defiance crossed her face, as though even at 6 years old, she'd made a decision she wasn't going to regret. "What did you do?" Melissa asked. Emily glanced at Rex again, and for the first time since she sat down, she smiled. "I went to him. I got close so he could smell me." Melissa kept her tone steady. "And what happened?" Emily's voice softened almost to a whisper. He stopped shaking. A rustle went through the jury box, but Melissa kept her eyes on Emily. "Why do you think that happened?" Emily looked down at her lap, her fingers stroking the rabbit's worn ear. "Because I told him it's okay." The words hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament, delicate, but with the potential to shatter everything. Melissa repeated them slowly. "You told him it's okay?" Emily nodded, this time with more confidence. "Yes, I said it. In the park. And I can say it now." At that moment, Rex lifted his head fully, his gaze fixed on Emily. His tail moved once, a single wag, slow and deliberate. The reaction in the courtroom was immediate, but restrained, a sharp intake of breath. From somewhere in the gallery, a pen clattering to the floor in the jury box. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing in quiet interest. The defense attorney stood. "Objection, Your Honor," he said quickly, trying to regain control of the moment. "This is anecdotal, emotional manipulation." "Sustained," Judge Whitman said, though his gaze lingered on Rex a second longer than necessary. Melissa turned back to Emily. "Emily, would you like to see Rex right now?" The girl hesitated, glancing at the judge. "It's your choice," he said gently. Emily nodded. "Yes." The bailiff moved to escort her, but she slipped from the witness chair and took small, deliberate steps toward the defense table. The room was silent, except for the faint squeak of her shoes against the polished floor. Rex didn't break eye contact. When she reached him, Emily knelt down, her dress pooling around her knees. She reached out a small hand, resting it lightly on his neck. The dog's eyes softened, and his head lowered toward her chest. She whispered again. This time, Rex stood up, pressing against her, his tail moving in slow, steady wags. The silence in the room was absolute. The defense attorney didn't speak. The prosecutor didn't press further. The judge didn't need to call for order, because no one wanted to break the moment. It was the kind of stillness where truth didn't need to be shouted. It simply existed, undeniable, in the bond between a girl and a dog. And though no verdict had been read, something in that room had shifted forever. The memory had never really left Emily's mind, though it had happened weeks before. Even now, as she sat in the courtroom, she could almost smell the wet grass and feel the cold rain from that afternoon. It had been one of those early spring days in Ashford when the sky couldn't decide between sunshine and a downpour. Emily and her mother had gone to the park after school, a rare break in the week's rain. She had been on the swings, her small sneakers kicking up wood chips, when the first drops began to fall. "Come on, sweetie," her mother had called, zipping up her own jacket. "Let's get to the gazebo before it pours." Emily had hopped off the swing and hurried after her. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles as they ran toward the shelter. The park was mostly empty, just a few scattered joggers, a man walking a beagle, and a tall man in a dark police jacket holding the leash of a large German shepherd. They reached the gazebo just as the rain thickened, the drops tapping loudly on the metal roof. Emily shook the water from her hair, giggling. But the sound faded as her eyes were drawn to the man and the dog, now standing a short distance away. The man was on his phone, his voice clipped and irritated. "Yeah, I heard you," he barked into the receiver. "I said I'm handling it." His free hand yanked on the leash, pulling the dog closer with a sharp motion. Emily's smile faded. The dog wasn't moving slowly because he was stubborn. She could see it. His legs trembled slightly, and his ears were pinned back. Rainwater dripped from his fur in streams, and his tail hung low, almost tucked under him. "Mom," Emily whispered, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "Why is that dog shaking?" Her mother glanced over. "Maybe he's cold," she said softly, trying not to stare. "Come here, stay close." But Emily didn't move closer to her mother. Her eyes stayed on the dog. Something about the way he looked at her, not at the man holding the leash, not at the ground, but straight at her, as if asking for something without words. The man noticed Emily staring. "Hey," he called sharply. "Don't come near him. He's not friendly." Emily flinched, but didn't look away. "What's his name?" she asked, her voice small. "Rex," the man said, his tone impatient. He gave another quick yank on the leash. The dog didn't resist, but Emily saw the way his muscles tensed, the way his eyes darted for a moment. Before returning to her her mother put a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, come sit down." But the pull in Emily's chest was stronger than her mother's hand. She stepped forward slowly, her sneakers making soft splashes in the puddles forming on the path. "Hey, I said stay back," the man warned, his voice rising. Emily didn't answer. She crouched a few feet away from Rex, lowering herself so her eyes were level with his. She didn't reach out right away. She just let him see her. The dog's trembling slowed. His ears began to lift slightly, though his tail stayed low. Emily tilted her head, studying him. "You're not bad," she whispered. more to herself than to him. The man sighed heavily. "Kid, you're going to get yourself bitten." But before he could finish, Rex moved. Not toward the man, not away, but forward, one careful step at a time, until his nose was inches from Emily's hands. She waited, letting him sniff her. His breath was warm against her skin, and for a moment, the rest of the park faded away. "It's okay," she said, softly. Two small words, spoken not as a command, but as a promise. Rex's ears twitched. His tail moved, not much, just the smallest wag, but enough for Emily to see it. And then, almost imperceptibly, his trembling stopped. She reached out and touched his neck, her fingers sinking into the wet fur. He exhaled, a long, slow breath, as if something inside him had loosened. The man frowned, tugging lightly at the leash. "Come on, Rex, let's go." But Rex didn't move. His eyes stayed on Emily, his body angled toward her despite the man's pull. Emily smiled, giving his neck a gentle rub. "It's okay," she repeated. Finally, the man gave a harder yank on the leash, and Rex obeyed, stepping reluctantly away. Emily's hand dropped to her side, empty now, but the warmth of the dog's fur lingered on her skin. Her mother ushered her back under the gazebo as the rain poured harder, but Emily barely noticed. She kept watching Rex until he disappeared. Down the path, the man muttering into his phone again. Something in that brief exchange had planted itself deep in her, an unshakable feeling that Rex had understood her, and she had understood him. In the weeks that followed, she thought about him often. At night, she would sometimes wake from dreams where Rex was running, free and happy, his fur dry and gleaming in the sun. In others, he was back in the rain, shaking, looking at her for help. She hadn't known then that she would see him again. She certainly hadn't known that it would be in a courtroom, with strangers watching and her words carrying the weight of truth. But she remembered that rainy day as clearly as if it had been yesterday. The sound of his breath, the feel of his fur, and the way everything changed the moment she said, "It's okay." And now, sitting in the witness chair weeks later, she could feel the same thing she had felt then. A quiet connection that didn't need explaining, only believing. The air inside the Ashford courtroom felt heavier now, as though everyone sensed they were standing on the edge of something about to tip. Emily's retelling of the Rainy Park encounter had been simple, almost understated, yet its effect rippled through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Even those who had come expecting a routine day of testimony now found themselves leaning forward in their seats, unable to look away. At the defense table, Officer Hargrove sat unnaturally still. His attorney, Lawrence Pike, tapped the end of his pen against his legal pad, the rhythm sharp and impatient. Pike had tried to dismiss the girl's account as childlike embellishment, but it hadn't landed the way he'd hoped. If anything, her innocence made her words harder to dismiss. Across from them, Rex remained lying on his mat, but his posture was no longer the languid sprawl he'd maintained all morning. His head was up now, ears pricked forward, eyes tracking Emily's every move. To anyone paying attention, and now everyone was, the dog's interest in her was unmistakable. Melissa Crane, the prosecutor, saw it. She knew moments like this couldn't be forced. They had to be allowed to breathe. She glanced at Judge Whitman, who was still watching the dog intently. Then she turned back to Emily. "Emily," she said softly, "I want you to take a good look at Rex Wright." "Now, is that the same dog you saw in the park?" Emily's gaze shifted from Melissa to the German Shepherd. The change in her expression was instant. Her shoulders eased, the tension in her jaw softened. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "That's him." Rex's ears twitched at her voice. Melissa let the answer sit for a moment, allowing the jury to notice the dog's reaction for themselves. Then she asked, "Do you think Rex remembers you?" A faint smile touched Emily's lips. "Yes," she said simply. Pike rose from his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." "Sustained," Whitman replied, though his eyes remained fixed on the girl. Melissa didn't fight the ruling. She didn't need to. The moment was already working. "Emily," she continued, "would you like to go say hello to Rex?" Emily hesitated. "Can I?" Melissa glanced toward the judge. Whitman studied her for a moment before nodding. "If the witness is willing, the court will allow it. Bailiff, please escort her." A murmur of anticipation swept through the gallery. The bailiff approached, but Emily shook her head gently. "I can walk," she said. Her voice was soft, but steady. She slid off the high witness chair, her small shoes clicking against the polished wood floor. Each step toward the defense. Table seemed to magnify the tension in the room. The jurors tracked her with their eyes, their bodies leaning forward unconsciously. Even the reporters in the back row had stopped scribbling, their pens poised above their notepads. Rex never looked away from her. By the time she was a few feet away, his tail began a slow, steady wag. His ears were fully up now, his head slightly tilted as though studying her face. Emily stopped in front of him, just outside the reach of his leash. She crouched slowly, her movements careful, deliberate. She didn't reach out right away. "Hi, Rex," she said quietly. The dog leaned forward, sniffing the air between them. Then, with no prompting from his handler, he closed the gap, pressing his nose gently into her hands. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Emily's small fingers curled against his fur. She looked into his eyes, speaking barely above a whisper. But the room was so silent that even the faintest sound seemed amplified. "It's okay." The change in Rex was immediate. He stepped forward, closing the space between them entirely, his head pressing into her chest. His tail wagged harder now, sweeping the air in slow arcs. Officer Hargrove shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening. Pike scribbled something on a legal pad, but didn't interrupt. Melissa, sensing the impact of the moment, addressed the jury without looking away from the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard testimony about a lack of trust between this dog and his handler. You've seen him obey commands mechanically, without enthusiasm. Now you see something different. You see choice." Pike stood again. "Objection. Counsel is testifying." "Overruled," Whitman said flatly, his eyes still on the girl and the dog. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor now, one hand stroking Rex's neck. The dog's eyes had softened, the wary stiffness gone from his posture. For a trained canine, whose discipline in public was legendary, his behavior was telling. "Emily," Melissa said gently, "can you tell the court what you just said to Rex?" Emily looked up. "I told him it's okay. The same as I did in the park," Melissa nodded. "And how did he react then?" "The same way," Emily said. "He stopped being scared." Her words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. From the jury box, a woman in her 50s bit her lip, her eyes fixed on Rex. A man in the front row of the gallery folded his arms, leaning forward as if trying to piece something together. Melissa took a slow step back toward her table. "No? Further questions at this time, Your Honor." Whitman nodded, turning to Pike. "Cross-examination?" Pike rose, buttoning his jacket. "Miss Emily," he began, his tone unnaturally warm. "Dogs wag their tails for many reasons, don't they? Sometimes they wag even when they're nervous. Did you know that?" Emily tilted her head slightly. "I guess. And sometimes they approach people they've never met before," Pike continued. "That doesn't mean they remember that person, right?" Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in quiet certainty. "He remembers me." Pike's smile faltered. "And how would you know that?" "Because," Emily said softly, "I remember him." A few members of the gallery exchanged glances. Pike shifted tactics, glancing toward the dog. "You've had dogs before?" Emily shook her head. "No." "So you wouldn't consider yourself an expert on canine behavior, would you?" "No," Emily admitted. "I'm just his friend." There was no sarcasm in her voice, no attempt at persuasion. Just truth, simple and unpolished. Pike pressed his lips together, clearly deciding there was no safe way to keep pushing without appearing to bully a child. "No further questions," he muttered, returning to his seat. Whitman looked between the attorneys, then at the jury. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, but the murmur in the room didn't fade. Conversation started immediately, hushed but urgent, as people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Rex stayed beside Emily until the bailiff gently guided her back toward her mother. Even then, his gaze followed her until the door closed behind them. It was subtle, but in the quiet moments after, even the most skeptical observer could feel it. The connection between the little girl and the police dog was real, and it was about to change everything. The moment Emily's words hung in the courtroom air, it was as if someone had pressed pause on the world. The judge's brow furrowed. The defense attorney, Mr. Lawson, blinked twice, his confident smirk faltering for the first time all morning. Even Rex had stilled, his head cocked slightly, ears angled toward Emily, as if replaying her voice in his mind. Prosecutor Marlowe leaned forward, sensing an opening. "Your Honor," she said calmly but firmly, "I believe the witness has just identified the animal in question as the same dog she encountered weeks prior. And that encounter may be directly relevant to the case." Lawson shot to his feet. "Objection. The child's statement is vague, and it's not vague," Emily said, surprising everyone, especially herself. She was looking directly at Rex now, her small voice steady. "That's him. I remember his eyes." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge raised a hand to silence the room. "Mr. Lawson, sit down. The court will hear the witness." Lawson hesitated, then lowered himself into his chair, his jaw tight. Marlowe approached the stand again, crouching so her eyes were level with Emily's. "Emily, you said that's him. What makes you so sure?" Emily's gaze didn't leave Rex. The way he looks at people, not mean, just like he's waiting for them to understand him. The judge glanced toward Rex, who was sitting quietly beside the bailiff, his tail resting still, but his eyes fixed on Emily. Marlowe turned slightly toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard testimony about the defendant's treatment of his police canine partner. You've also been told the dog is aggressive, dangerous, even unstable. But here you see the truth. This is not an aggressive animal. This is a dog that recognizes someone he trusts." Lawson sprang up again. "Your Honor, I must insist." But before he could finish, the judge cut him off. "Mr. Lawson, you'll have your chance to cross-examine. For now, the witness will continue." Emily swallowed, her hands twisting in her lap. "When I saw him before, he was shaking. It was raining, and the man holding him pulled on his leash really hard. He didn't like it, I could tell. But when I talked to him, he stopped shaking." The jury leaned in, their expressions softening. "And was the man you saw that day in the park the same man sitting at the defense table now?" Marlowe asked gently. Emily nodded without hesitation. "Yes." A quiet gasp spread through the room. Lawson's face went pale, then flushed red. "Your Honor, I must protest. This is nothing but emotional manipulation. She's a child. Children imagine things." Emily's chin lifted just slightly, a spark of stubbornness in her eyes. "I'm not imagining." The judge turned to Lawson. "You'll have your opportunity, counselor. Sit down." Lawson's lips tightened into a thin line as he sat, gripping his pen so tightly his knuckles whitened. Marlowe straightened and addressed the court. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests permission to have the witness approach the K-9 under supervision to demonstrate the nature of their interaction." Lawson was on his feet again, but the judge's gavel struck before he could speak. "Permission granted. The court will observe." The bailiff led Rex a few steps closer to the witness stand. Emily slid off her chair, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished wood floor. The courtroom was utterly silent, except for the faint jingle of Rex's tags. She stopped just 2 feet from him. His tail twitched once, then again, and then began to wag, slow at first, then faster. Emily knelt, holding out her small hand. "Hi, Rex." The German shepherd stepped forward, closing the gap, and pressed his head into her palm. A collective exhale swept through the room. One of the jurors actually smiled. Rex's body relaxed completely, his ears lifting, eyes soft. Emily scratched gently under his chin, the same way she had in the park. "It's okay," she murmured, those same 2 words again. And just like before, he seemed to understand. Marlowe let the moment linger before speaking. "Your Honor, this is the dog the defense has claimed is too aggressive to interact safely with anyone but his handler. Yet here we have a child, a stranger, demonstrating the opposite." Lawson's voice was tight. "Dogs behave differently in different circumstances. This proves nothing." But the jury's expressions told another story. The scene had pierced through legal arguments and technicalities. They weren't just seeing evidence anymore. They were feeling it. Emily returned to her seat, the faintest smile on her lips. Rex lay down beside the bailiff, his head turned so he could still watch her. For the first time since the trial began, Lawson's air of control was gone. He flipped rapidly through his notes, his movements jerky, as if trying to find something. Anything to regain ground. Marlowe, on the other hand, closed her folder with quiet confidence. She didn't need to press further right now. The seed was planted. The image of a supposedly dangerous police dog choosing to trust. A little girl was burned into the minds of everyone in that courtroom. And deep down, Lawson knew it. The silence that followed Emily's interaction with Rex was almost deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that happens when people lose interest. It was the heavy, weighted kind, thick with tension, and the unspoken understanding that something important had just happened. But Lawson wasn't ready to concede anything. Not yet. He rose from his seat with deliberate slowness, straightened his tie, and walked toward the witness stand. His face carried a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, and his voice came out smooth but sharp-edged. "Emily," he began, "you've been very brave today. But you do understand that sometimes our memories can play tricks on us, don't you?" Emily frowned slightly, unsure of where he was going. "I remember what I saw." Yes, I'm sure you believe that. But you're only, what, 7 years old? 8, she corrected. Lawson gave a quick, insincere chuckle. 8, of course. But even adults can mix up details, especially when they think they've seen something important. For example, you say you saw this dog in the park. Yes? Emily nodded. And it was raining? Yes. And the man with the dog, you're saying it was my client, Officer Brooks? She nodded again. Lawson paced a step to the side, glancing at the jury as if inviting them into his reasoning. "Now, Emily, do you go to the park often?" "Sometimes." "And when you do you see lots of people walking their dogs?" "Yes." "Some of them big, like Rex?" "Some," she said slowly. "So isn't it possible that you saw a different dog that just looked like Rex?" Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, I know it was him." Lawson feigned surprise. "You're certain? 100%? 100%. The firmness in her voice made a few jurors glance at one another. Lawson shifted tactics. You also said the man pulled on Rex's leash really hard. Could it be that he was just trying to keep the dog from running off? That's not bad treatment, is it? Emily's small shoulders straightened. He didn't just pull. He yanked. Rex made a sound like he was hurt. That got the jury's attention. Lawson's voice softened, trying a different approach. Emily, have you ever had a dog? Yes, Max, he's a beagle. And sometimes, if Max doesn't listen, you have to pull his leash a little, right? I don't hurt him, she replied quickly. Something about her tone made Lawson hesitate. It wasn't defensive. It was resolute. The courtroom was still, the air electric. Lawson decided to push again. Emily, I'm not saying you're lying, but sometimes people, even good people, remember things in ways that aren't quite right. Do you think maybe you misunderstood what you saw? Her reply came without a pause. No, I didn't misunderstand. He was mean to Rex. The simplicity of her statement made it harder to discredit. Lawson's jaw tightened. He looked toward the judge, then back to Emily. All right, let's talk about something else you said. You claim Rex stopped shaking when you spoke to him. Dogs can't understand words like people do, can they? Emily tilted her head. Maybe not all words, but they can understand how you say them. They can understand if you care. The jury seemed to lean in at that. Even the judge's expression softened slightly. Lawson's pen tapped against his folder. This wasn't going as planned. His next question came out a little too quick. Emily, do you know why Rex is here today? She glanced at the big dog. Because they want to take him away, or hurt him. The choice of words, hurt him, seemed to ripple through the room. Lawson's lips pressed into a thin line. No one wants to hurt him, he said, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. This is about safety. Rex bit someone, isn't that true? Emily shook her head. That's what they're saying. But I don't think he did it because he's bad. I think something happened. Her voice faltered slightly for the first time. She looked at Rex again, as if willing him to understand. She was on his side. Lawson tried to capitalize on the moment. Emily, you weren't there when the alleged bite happened, were you? No. So you can't possibly know what happened, can you? I can't know everything, she admitted, but I know him. It was a simple sentence, but it struck deep. Lawson's shoulders stiffened. He could feel the jury slipping further away from him, each word from Emily chipping at the foundation of his argument. He gave a tight smile, turned to the judge, and said, "No further questions." As he walked back to his seat, it was clear he hadn't regained any ground. The judge looked toward Marlowe. Redirect? Marlowe stood, her movements calm, unhurried. Just one question, Your Honor. She turned to Emily. You've been very brave today. Could you tell the court, in your own words, why you came here? Emily's answer was soft, but every syllable carried. Because Rex can't talk, someone has to. It landed like a gavel strike in the hearts of the jury. A few even shifted uncomfortably, as if reminded that their decision would speak for the voiceless. The judge dismissed Emily, and she stepped down from the stand, her eyes never leaving Rex until she was back beside her mother. Rex's gaze followed her the whole way, his ears alert, his body leaning subtly in her direction. In the defense's corner, Lawson sat rigid, his confidence visibly eroded. He had tried to make the child's words seem unreliable, but instead, he had given her more chances to show sincerity, and sincerity was winning. Marlowe, on the other hand, knew the tide was turning. The jury had seen something they couldn't unsee. A little girl standing firm against the pressure of a seasoned attorney, all for the sake of a dog who couldn't defend himself. And if Lawson thought that was the worst of it, he was wrong. The prosecution still had one card left to play, a witness who would unravel the rest of the defense's story and bring the truth about Rex's aggression into the open. But that was for tomorrow's session. For now, the court adjourned, and the image burned into everyone's mind was the same. Emily, standing small but unshaken, and Rex, watching her as if she was the only person in the world who truly saw him. The next morning, the courthouse was a different place. The jurors filed in with expressions that were noticeably heavier than before. Emily's testimony still lingered in the air, and it was obvious that Lawson's cross-examination had not done what he'd hoped. Even the court reporter seemed unusually alert, ready for whatever was about to happen. Marlowe knew the moment had come. This was the turning point, the one witness Lawson didn't see coming. When the judge called the court to order, she rose and said, "The prosecution calls Mr. Daniel Hayes to the stand." There was a ripple of curiosity through the gallery. No one had heard the name before. Lawson's brow furrowed instantly. He clearly had no idea who this was. From the back of the room, a man in his late 50s made his way forward. He walked with a slight limp, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of a worn brown jacket. His eyes were sharp, the kind that seemed to notice everything without revealing much in return. After being sworn in, Marlowe stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, could you tell the court a bit about yourself?" He cleared his throat. "Name's Daniel Hayes. I've been a groundskeeper at Franklin Park for about 27 years. And do you work most days?" 7 days a week, even in bad weather. Parks don't take days off. There was a small chuckle from the jury at that, but Marlowe didn't let the moment linger. "Mr. Hayes, were you working on the afternoon of April 12th? "Yes, ma'am. I was trimming the hedges near the south entrance. Rain was coming down pretty hard." "Did you see Officer Brooks there with Rex?" "Yes, I did." The first quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lawson immediately stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness was not disclosed during discovery." "This is," Marlowe was ready. "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes came forward after seeing news coverage of this trial. His testimony directly relates to the incident in question. Given the late discovery, I'm willing to allow the defense a recess after examination if they wish to prepare." The judge looked at Lawson, whose lips were pressed into a hard line. "Overruled. Proceed, but keep it relevant." "Ms. Marlowe." Marlowe nodded. "Mr. Hayes, please tell the court what you saw that day." Hayes took a deep breath, leaning slightly toward the microphone. "I saw Officer Brooks with Rex on a short leash. A dog wasn't pulling, but Brooks kept yanking him closer, real hard. The kind of yank that makes a dog choke." Several jurors shifted in their seats. "What happened next?" Marlowe asked. "They stopped near the benches. I was about 30 feet away, behind some hedges. Brooks was talking on his phone, sounded angry. Rex sat down, real calm. Then a man walked by, maybe mid-30s, and said something to Brooks. Couldn't hear exactly what, but it made Brooks snap. He yanked Rex up from sitting, then pushed him toward the other man, like he was using the dog to scare him." Lawson stood. "Objection. Speculation about intent." "Sustained," the judge said. "Mr. Hayes, stick to what you directly observed." Hayes nodded. "All I know is," the man backed up real fast, hands raised, "Rex didn't lunge or growl. He looked more confused than anything." "And the alleged bite?" Marlowe prompted. Hayes leaned forward. "Didn't happen then." Brooks pulled Rex away, still on that short leash, and walked toward the north path. I kept watching, because it didn't sit right with me. About a minute later, a woman came jogging up the path. She slowed when she saw Rex. That's when Brooks jerked the leash again, but this time Rex twisted sideways, like he was trying to get away from the pull. The woman must have gotten startled, 'cause she stumbled back and yelled. Brooks stepped between them, and then he made a big scene, shouting, holding Rex's collar, saying the dog had gone for her. The room seemed to freeze. Even the sound of the judge's pen stopping on paper was audible. Marlowe's voice was calm. "To be clear, did you see Rex bite the woman?" "No, ma'am. I saw Rex try to back away." The only one pulling forward was Brooks. Gasps spread through the gallery. Lawson's jaw tightened, his pen tapping rapidly against his folder. Marlowe paced slowly. "Mr. Hayes, why didn't you report this earlier? I didn't think anyone would listen." "Brooks is an officer. I'm just the guy who cleans the park. But when I saw that little girl on the news, the one who talked about Rex shaking, I knew I couldn't keep quiet." Marlowe let the words hang before stepping back. No further questions. Lawson stood abruptly for cross-examination, but the damage was clear in his movements. He wasn't attacking, he was scrambling. "Mr. Hayes," he began, "you say you were 30 feet away, behind hedges. Is that correct?" "Yes." "So your view could have been blocked, right?" "Not the parts I'm talking about. And it was raining. Visibility was poor. Poor if you're looking for details. But a dog being yanked around? That's not hard to see." Lawson's tone sharpened. "You admit you couldn't hear the conversation between Brooks and the other individuals, correct?" "That's right. So you can't possibly know what provoked Brooks' actions." Hayes met his gaze evenly. "Don't need to know the words to see when someone's roughing up a dog." The jury's eyes lingered on Hayes as Lawson tried a different line. "Isn't it true that your job at the park has you in disagreements with law enforcement from time to time?" "Noise complaints, park curfew enforcement." Hayes cut in before Marlowe could object. "If you're asking if I've told officers to stop harassing homeless folks in the park, yes. I've done that. But I don't make things up about people. And I sure don't lie about animals." The directness of his answer landed harder than Lawson expected. Lawson muttered, "No further questions," and sat down without looking at the jury. The judge addressed the witness. "Mr. Hayes, you may step down." As Hayes left the stand, the tension in the room was palpable. Two testimonies, Emily's and Hayes', now told different pieces of the same story. Rex wasn't the aggressor. In the defense's corner, Brooks sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. For the first time, his eyes darted toward Rex, not with affection, but with something colder. The jury had seen it too, and Marlowe knew she'd struck the blow she needed. Tomorrow would be closing arguments. But as the court adjourned for the day, one thing was certain: the image of a calm, confused Rex being yanked and framed for aggression had burned itself into the minds of everyone in that room, and that image was not going away. The morning of the final day carried a stillness that felt unnatural. The courthouse steps were quieter than usual, even though more people had gathered. Reporters huddled with cameras at the ready, their breath visible in the cool air, as if the entire city was holding itself in suspense. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with an energy that wasn't quite noise, but wasn't silence either. Every chair was filled. The jurors sat with the stoicism of people who knew their next decision would change a life, maybe 2 lives. If you counted the dogs, Rex was there, sitting beside Officer Bennett in the back row, his head resting on his paws. He didn't know this was the most important day of his life. His eyes, calm but tired, scanned the room without urgency. If he felt the weight of the moment, he didn't show it. Judge Hartman entered, and the bailiff called for order. "We'll hear closing arguments," she announced. "Ms. Marlowe, you may proceed." Marlowe stood, smoothing the sleeve of her dark blazer. She moved to the center of the courtroom, deliberately taking her time before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but warm. "You've heard lot these past days. Words, reports, testimonies. And yet, this case is not about documents or technicalities. It's about truth. It's about whether we allow an innocent animal to take the fall for the actions of a man who should have known better. She let her eyes drift toward Rex for just a heartbeat. You've heard from Emily Carter, a child with no reason to lie. You've heard from Daniel Hayes, who came forward only because his conscience wouldn't let him stay quiet. Both described the same thing: a dog who is calm, a dog who wasn't the aggressor, a dog who was provoked and framed. Her voice sharpened just enough to draw the jury's attention fully. The defense wants you to believe this is about safety, that Rex is dangerous. But I ask you, where's the evidence? No medical reports of a real bite. No neutral witnesses supporting Brooks' story. Just his word against the truth you've heard here. Marlowe stepped closer to the jury box. If Rex is destroyed, it will not make this community safer. It will only destroy trust. Trust in the animals who protect us. Trust in the system that's supposed to protect them. She paused, letting the weight of that last line settle. Don't punish loyalty. Don't punish innocence. Send Rex home. When she sat down, the room felt tighter, as if the walls had moved in a few inches. Lawson stood next, straightening his tie with an unnecessary sharpness. He approached the jury with the confidence of a man who'd rehearsed this speech 100 times. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution has spun you a story. Emotional, yes. Heartfelt, sure. But this is a courtroom. And in court, we deal in facts, not feelings. He paced slowly. The fact remains. Rex is a trained canine. These dogs are powerful. And when they misjudge, the results can be catastrophic. The public's safety is our priority. His tone hardened. You've heard conflicting accounts. Rain, distance, hedges, all elements that can distort what people think they saw. You cannot convict a man or spare an animal based on half-views and guesswork. Officer Brooks acted as he believed was necessary to protect a civilian. That is his duty. He looked at Rex, then back at the jury. If we excuse this incident, we set a dangerous precedent. We say it's fine for trained dogs to make mistakes in public spaces. And next time, it might be a child who isn't so lucky. Lawson sat down, leaving the jury with an unease that was deliberate, but not necessarily convincing. The judge gave her instructions, and the jurors were dismissed to deliberate. The room emptied except for the essential parties. Hours passed. Rex dozed quietly. Marlowe scribbled notes she didn't need to write, simply to keep her hands busy. Brooks sat stiff, staring at nothing. Lawson kept glancing toward the jury room door, his impatience betraying him. At 4:17 p.m., the bailiff announced, "The jury has reached a verdict." Everyone returned to their seats. The jurors filed in, faces unreadable. The foreperson held the folded paper like it was something fragile. Judge Hartman accepted it, read silently, then returned it. "Will the defendant please rise?" Brooks stood. Rex didn't move, but his ears twitched. The foreperson's voice was steady. "On the matter of the euthanization order for the senior for the choose police canine known as Rex, we, the jury, find that the dog is not a danger to the public, and is therefore to be released from custody and returned to service under new handler supervision." A sound broke in the gallery. Not quite a cheer, but not silence either. It was the kind of sound people make when relief bursts out before they can stop it. Rex's tail thumped once against the bench. Marlowe allowed herself the smallest smile, but didn't look away from Brooks. His jaw was tight, and his eyes, for the first time, held something close to panic. Judge Hartman banged her gavel. "Order. The court thanks the jury for its service. This case is concluded." The moment she left the bench, the air seemed to lift. Bennett knelt beside Rex, rubbing behind his ears. "You're going home, buddy." Reporters swarmed the aisle, shouting questions, but Marlowe cut through them to reach Rex. She crouched, meeting his gaze. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered, even though he couldn't understand the words in the human sense. The calm in his eyes was answer enough. Brooks tried to leave quickly, but Hayes intercepted him near the door. No one could hear what Hayes said, but whatever it was, it stopped Brooks cold for a full 3 seconds before he pushed past. Outside, the late afternoon light painted the courthouse steps gold. Cameras flashed as Bennett led Rex out on a loose leash. People reached out to pat his head, some even wiping tears. Emily was there with her mother, waiting quietly. When Rex saw her, his pace quickened just slightly. Not a pull, just an eager recognition. Emily's smile was small but certain. She knelt and put both hands on his face. "You're safe now," she murmured. Marlowe watched from a few steps away, knowing this was the ending that mattered more than any legal victory. Because in the end, it wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about telling the truth loudly enough that it couldn't be ignored. It was about making sure that loyalty, once given, wasn't repaid with betrayal. And in that golden light, with the courthouse behind them and the crowd pressing in not with hostility, but with gratitude, Rex walked away, not as an accused, not as a danger, but as what he had always been, a protector, a partner, and finally a survivor.